Welcome back to Satasa University's video training series. This lesson is titled Modify My First App, How to Modify an Existing App and Add Enhancement or Lookup Data. Objectives for this learning include how to bring in or add a lookup table, how to join a lookup table with existing data, how to modify a transform process to add a new field using the lookup table, how to create a filter in your transform process, how to execute the transform process in drop and replace mode, and how to preview the results in the output table. Again, this training assumes that you have taken the creating my first app, low code transform process, and deploy my first app lessons and have successfully completed those, as that resulting workflow will be referenced in this lesson. So let's go ahead and move over to the app and get started. So the first thing you're going to need to do is to click on your app from the homepage that you have created in your previous lesson. And again, as we have done in our previous lessons, we are going to turn on the interactive mode. So you click on that interactive button at the top. Again, if you've had a previous runtime installed or interactive mode installed or configured, you're going to have that configuration setting still in the top. Again, what you'll need to do is select your runtime that you had configured and click Start. And you'll see that it's going to go ahead and start creating that process. If you don't have a runtime listed, simply click on the Add Runtime button and you will give the runtime a name in the name field, and then you will select the training runtime from the training template section. Click the Add button at the bottom, and you'll see the same screen where it's creating your runtime at that point. And so the system's now configuring that, and we'll go ahead and close this section, clicking on the X in the upper right side right there. Okay, so in the previous lesson that we worked on before, which was this transform node that we had brought into our application, we created a new user field that was called user_cn. And I'm just going to show you real quick. You remember we extracted from the full user ID that username. And we're going to need to create another transform because we want to use the output of this table, which is that field, as the lookup value for our new lookup table, or our dimension that contains our relevant data or our matching data. So what we'll need to do now, and I'm going to, again, scroll in or out to maneuver on the workspace. I'm going to go ahead and move mine around just a little bit to make this easier to see. Unlock from the upper menu. Remember, you click the little lock symbol to do that. And we're in edit mode now that we've got the save showing. So like I said, we're going to add another transform. So we're going to, down here on the left side in the process section, we're going to scroll down and find that transform node. And we're going to click, hold, drag, drop, and release. Now we've just added a new node to our workflow here, at least the canvas. The next section is to grab the output table from that previous transform, and we're going to drag and connect it to the new transform node. You'll notice that does turn white. That means that the connection from the output table to that node is now configured, and we are ready to begin configurations of this new node. So we'll go ahead and click on that white node, and remember the little double arrows at the top of the page, go ahead and click on that to give you a full screen. Just makes it easier to maneuver and understand what's going on in the configuration section. Again, we'll do a quick review, run history. There is not going to be any in this particular node because this process has not been run. Status, remember, it's going to ask to validate that the connections have been configured and they have a table that's used as an input. We have green checks for both of those because that previous transformation node has been configured correctly. And again, remember the notes section, you can add notes in any section there. Once you add it, you can have collaboration happening with your other team members who can see this this node and this workflow and can comment on it. And so we'll go ahead and move down into the configuration section. We'll first click on the General tab. Remember, this is where we're going to be able to give this thing another name. And I'm going to, since this is a second transform, I'm not going to leave that number 2 in there. I'm just going to call it second transform, if I can spell it correctly. And then we'll click on the join on the left-hand side here. And you'll notice that the primary source is that table that we just connected from that first transform. And we're connecting it, we've connected now to the second transform. And we're going to just give this a different name instead of this really long name. We'll call this one second transform as well as the alias name. We're not going to do our join just quite yet. We'll come back to that in just a few minutes. Let's go on down to the mapping section. And again, this is where we're going to define all those input fields and labels for the schema. Again, we're simply going to leave the type as simple, our default there. And we're just going to click on the Add All button, and we're just going to grab all the fields from that previous table. So you'll see here that we've got all those fields that we configured before. And the only change is they now have this new alias name that we gave, in this section here, the second transform. So now you'll see everything here has that that new designation. And that's all we'll need to do right now for the mapping, just to bring in all those other fields. We're just simply creating a copy at this point of that other transform node. This time in the filters, we're going to do a little something different to give you some exposure to how to add a filter. So we'll go ahead and click on that Apply Where Filter section. In the left value, we're going to click on the date time. And in the operator field, we're going to choose, we'll scroll down and choose the not equal indicator. So that exclamation equals means not equal. And we want to look for where there's any blank or empty rows in our data. We don't want to work on those. So where date time is not equal to a blank. So we'll click on the right value here, and we're going to click on the function editor. That again is going to open up like any function editor we've worked with before. And simply in this section, we're going to put 2 single quotes. And we'll apply that. And right here now, you'll see in the top where this transform date time does not equal a blank. And then we're going to click on the green check mark here, and we're going to add a second value here, another date time, just to show you a different option for this. And in the operator, again, this time we're going to scroll down to the is not and click on the function editor again. And this time we're going to do is not null and apply that just to give you some exposure and show you what the filter editor looks like and how that can be configured. So now you've configured 2 filters in this node. Next section for us to go to is output. So we'll click on the output on the field here. And we probably want to give this again some type of easy to understand name. So maybe we're going to call this one, maybe we'll call this one user added. Oops, let's type it correctly. User added is our output table name, and I'm just going to copy and paste that onto this other one. Again, no changes are needed in the configuration section. And for now, we're going to go ahead and click the green checkbox in the upper right to save this configuration, and we'll come back to it in just a few minutes after we add our lookup table or our enhancement data to this process. So now you'll notice that the node is light green because we've got some configurations done in it, but now we need to add that lookup data. And for purposes of this training exercise, we're going to provide you with a previously configured lookup table, so that adding non-event or lookup tables or enhancement data, any of that sort of configuration options are going to be covered in a separate training video. But for now, we're just going to talk about one that we've configured for you. And this table is located in the event store section in the left menu. Remember that from previous lessons that any output tables that we create in an app are written to a specific event store after they're processed. So we're going to go on the left-hand side here. I'm going to scroll back up and find in the store section, you'll see event store. And this time we're going to drag and drop event store kind of close to the second transform node, and we're just going to let go. So then we're going to click on this white event store because we need to configure it. And you'll notice here we're in the configuration section. There is some other stuff here, but we can't, I'll show you, there's nothing there because we haven't configured it yet. So what we need to do is configure this event store. So in the training event store, you're going to notice there's a field called training user lookup. So that's what we're going to select. So event store, training event store, data set is the training user lookup. And now that we've selected that, if we go back over here to the overview section, details are now going to show us details about this training user lookup table. It's going to show us the schema, all the different fields that are available within this data. There's no state because it's just a flat file. There's no partitions, so it's just a single file. And if we preview this, we'll be able to see this really has a bunch of information about users. Here's a full name, maybe a unique code or universal ID. It's got some other information that we've kind of added in here. Maybe there's a role if they're an Intel analyst or a geo analyst, their email name and their full email address. Here's their country of experience, their organization, email domain, just a couple of random things that we've created just for training purposes to show you how this works. So we've got that configured. We'll go ahead and click the green, and you'll notice that this training lookup or event store turns purple, and that means that we're ready to use this as a input to something else. So now we need to connect this lookup table to the transform node. And we'll do that by on the right-hand side of that table again, you'll see the black dot get a little bit bigger. We'll drag and drop that and connect it to our transform node. And now you'll notice we've got that node connected to our transform node. And I can now click on this transform node, open it back up. And again, I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bigger so it's easier for us to see what's going on in here. Now that we've opened this up and we've added that lookup table, it's time for us to actually join this table to our transform node. So we'll do that by clicking the green plus here under joins. And you'll notice we get a menu option now for configuring this join. So we're going to click on the join type, and you've got 4 different options. You've got a inner join, you've got a left join, a right join, and a full outer join. And we're going to have a separate video to go through all those different join types and options. For our training purposes, we're going to use a left join since we want to match all the user CNs that are in our left table or our source table, and we want to match those to any matching ID in the lookup table. We want to make sure whether or not they match in the lookup table, we still want to have all our users in our data. So that's why we're using this left join. Then we're going to click on source, and we're going to use this training lookup as the source of our join. And we're going to give it an alias just to make it easier to work with. Sometimes those names can be a little long, and we just want to make sure we understand what it is that we're working with here. Next, we're going to click on the left value field, and this is where we're going to choose that user CN from our source. So the user CN from our second transform source, and we want it to match or equal from the right value or the right table, this user lookup field. And I had shown you before, there was a universal ID that matches the user CN from our transform data. And you can, if you want to, you can right click on that little 4 squares there, or the 6 squares, and then open in a new tab. And maybe you want to look at, let's see if I can find it real quick here, the training user lookup. We can look at this in a preview screen just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. This universal ID, and this may look familiar from our previous video where we've got a username that looks like this in our data. So that's why we're using universal ID as our matching field in our join. So now that we've got that set up, we can simply click the configuration on the right side, that green checkbox, and save that. Now that we've saved the join, we need to add those new fields into our mapping. And it's kind of an important step to save the join, just to make sure you save your configuration progress and you don't mess anything up there. So now if we go back into our configurations, open this up to full screen, we'll see our join has been saved and it is there. Now we're going to add those additional fields from that lookup table as output field parameters in our new transform node. So we're going to go to the mapping section, and we're going to, as you can see here, there's nothing here but our data that we brought from the first transform node. So now we want to add all those other lookup elements. So we'll just click the add button, and you'll notice in here, if we click on select fields, if we scroll down, we'll see that there is all these user fields available now. So we're going to click on every single one of them because we just want to bring them all in just to get an idea what data is available for our analysts or data scientists to use in a later, a later process. So once you've selected them all, click apply. And if we scroll down inside our mapping section, now you're going to see all those other elements and all those other names and labels have been added to our source. So that's very simple and easy. And if you needed to do some things like we did before with creating some functions and do some other enhancements to that, you could certainly do that here. But for training purposes right now, we're going to click on the green check mark here, and our second transform has been updated with our lookup table and modified. And now I'm going to click on the save and lock button, which locks the configuration. Remember, we have to have that locked before we can process the data. And again, to process the job, we'll go through these steps once again. Hold down the shift key, click on that light green node, and you'll notice again, get the check mark, it turns light blue, says it's ready to be processed, and we've got a running cluster. You notice here at the top in our interactive mode, our cluster is running. So now we can click the run button, and we will get that job initialization all submitted for processing. Click the X, close that out. And again, we're going to click up here in the upper right on the activity section that has this green node now. And we'll notice we've got a run that's been starting. I'll go ahead and click on the arrow here to expand that section. And again, this is the time that we have to wait now for the process to kick off. The cluster is running, so it doesn't have to create that cluster. But let's see, I'm going to click over here and drag this over. Remember, Dragging it allows us to, oops, let's close that out, allows us to wait for the node to process. And what we're waiting for, again, remember, is this green, light green node to turn to a white, icon with that dashed ring around it, which means that the process has kicked off. There it goes, right there. That's what we were waiting on. We were waiting on that process to kick off and start working. And again, if there are errors with this configuration, if there's some kind of an error in our join or some of the mapping or whatever we've created here, we can, whoops, keep clicking the wrong button there. We will watch to see if we get this node to turn red, which would indicate that the job's failed and there's an error with the process. And if that occurred, again, just to review, we would be able to click on this button to look at the log files and get an example or an idea of where the error occurred. But as we're sitting here waiting for this to finish, again, we are joining on, remember, we extracted the user ID, that user CN out of that user ID field, and we're joining it. Oh, okay, our node has finished. We can go ahead and close this side since our process is finished and click on the output table to take a peek at it and make sure everything is working and is how we anticipate it to be displayed. Again, in the details, we have our designation that this is a table, the name of our table, the event store again that it's been stored in. Schema again is now contains all those different elements that we added from the lookup table. The state file again, since we're only processing 1 day because our date range, remember, in interactive mode is just 1 day. And then the preview section, now we can scroll over and see those additional fields. Remember, this is where it ended before with our user CN. Well, now we've got other information about this user, his country of experience, email address, first, last name, organization, what kind of an analyst or what role he has, unique identification codes. There's that universal ID that we matched on, a user ID key for some other information in a later training video that we'll use. So here it looks like we've got all our data processed correctly. Our lookup table has enhanced our data as we expected. And now we're ready to proceed to the next lesson, which is deploying this modified app and deploying this workflow to production and processing the data in production. So now we can go ahead and close this out. We don't need our interactive mode anymore, so we can go ahead and turn off that cluster. It's going to ask us if we want to shut it down and say, yes, that's fine. We want to do that. And then we will click on the upper left corner, that back arrow, and return back to the home page. And there you have it. That concludes this video.